It is a philosophy that is permeating in different structures. It can be traditional, it can be also stimulated by religious beliefs. It is where there is a popular culture that reinforces the idea of sexual purity as a measure of a person's worth. And women are often societally judged according to the core principle of purity culture, which includes sexual abstinence and virginity as a concept. However, this culture is increasingly being recognized, and there are some harmful contributions that have been seen to the rights and freedoms of women in society. We speak to our guest today, social commentator Lethabo Maluke, who is going to talk a little bit about the impact of purity culture. Lethabo, welcome on the show.
Hi, Benjamin. Thank you for having me again.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit. What does this purity culture mean to you?
So, purity culture, how I define it, is like a movement that emphasizes the importance of sexual abstinence, particularly before marriage. We see it in Christianity, we see it in our own traditional beliefs. It's not limited to just religion or spirituality, it can manifest in so many different ways. And essentially, it ties your value to your ability to keeping yourself sexually pure before marriage. Yeah, that's how I define it.
And what do you think about it when you observe this particular practice?
I think it has kind of like derailed the kind of sexual positivity that you would expect, especially my generation, to advance. Because I think the common misconception about, being against purity culture or critiquing it or deconstructing it is that you are pro, I guess, hookup culture. Whereas it also impacts how people view testing for HIV, speaking openly about sexual health, how
Mhm.
disclosing their status to their partners, therefore impacting their own safety, their sexual partner safety. It impacts how parents are able to structure conversations about sexual safety with their teens and people going into early adulthood.
Sure.
I mean, we also see it impacting in when people go to test at a clinic, how so many nurses and certain healthcare professionals hold hostility towards young people who want to inquire about their health and they say, well, you should just stop sleeping around.
So
Yeah.
it's almost like mythologizing sex in a way, right, in our communities
Yeah.
to a point whereby there's not even an engagement with sex as a reality in our communities, right?
Yeah.
From our parenting to also the way we are educating in our system, but also how we are offering even sexual services in our communities, right? What do you think has
Yes.
enforced this kind of thing? Because it's a broad church and it's happening everywhere in different parts of our society, right?
Yes.
When you look at it, what do you think is the root system here?
So it's several things. Firstly, we are in a very bad time economically, and during those times, people lean more onto religion. Like people become more conservative, they become more spiritual, because when so many things are horrible happening around us, we need a higher power to lean on and to blame. And when we put an emphasis on this higher power, a lot of us revert back to finding favor with the higher power. So we lean into beliefs where we police how, oh my gosh, how am I showing up in religion? Am I worthy of this? Am I worthy of that? But more importantly, we're living in a time where no one is earning enough money. So a lot of women are being kind of like sold this idea through sprinkle, sprinkle culture. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's kind of like
Hmm.
Yeah.
this emphasis that women need to tune their image to be worthy in the eyes of men, like don't curl your hair like this, don't do this like that. But a huge thing that comes up in those conversations is body count. And a lot of women are being told that, well, if you have a high body count, no high value man will want to invest in you, and no benevolent patriarch will want to save you.
Hmm.
So it's coming from the scarcity mindset created by capitalism, our terrible economy, but also a lot of us trying to find favor within our religions and trying to find a way in which we can be more worthy.
Mm.
But I also see this in a lot of traditional thinking that we have this kind of a
Yes,
thinking where there's a lot of patriarchal views on
yes,
on women. Like this is not a fun example to make. I remember when I was a young boy, right? There was an obsession. Let's say if you liked a girl, right, where someone boys would say, "Is she a virgin?" That would be like a big question as a little boy. in the 90s. I'm like,
Yeah.
no, I wouldn't even understand what that actually meant because I wasn't even sexually active. But that was a cultural thing where sexual purity, in inverted commas, was kind of a reason why you should actually like someone. And I mean, I'm only kind of like in my teens, 11, 12, 13, 14. So I think this sexual purity also comes from how we socialized around thinking about sex issues just as a society in general. And I think some of these things also come from traditions.
Yes, you're absolutely correct, Benjamin. Because I think traditionally, especially in the Black community across cultures, we still view sex as something that is done to women and not something that women are in like voluntarily participating in. So if sex is done to women, we see it as a damaging act to women. That's why we see, I think, virginity as this thing that proves that you're not damaged because we don't think that women are participating in it willingly.
Yeah, that's so true. I mean, if you look at some of the cultures that we see in our African societies in particular, virginity testing still happens to this day in many societies as a traditional practice. We also have female genital mutilation in other parts of the world and the African continent, where young girls at an age even before they even know much about themselves are tested, are cut, are even, mutilated in their genitals for the sake of the pleasure of man in the future. You will remain in this way until you are able to pleasure a man. And we think that we're quite progressive these days, but even if you go and look at social media, two progressive people, men and women alike, you hear it in the way that we speak and how we address certain issues around sexuality, especially sexuality towards women, that this is an ingrained thinking that comes from purity culture. Why do you think it's so hard to shake off these ingrained notions?
I think so many of our beliefs about sex live in the hypothetical, right? And a lot of it is never put to practice because of the shame that we've created around talking. So a lot of the time when people understand or make an attempt to understand, like Benjamin said, you hear it from other people's perspective, right? You are not encouraged to do your own research. You're not encouraged to express your frustrations, but you're not encouraged to not know. People kind of live in this area where you're either an expert at sex or you keep quiet. But the only way you can be an expert at anything is by talking openly about it. And so, for a lot of us to shake it off, we'd actually need to understand how these harmful beliefs are harming us. I mean, if you see it as something that's either good or bad, but you can't interrogate why, you'll never really shake it. I mean, something that I will say with purity culture and my journey of deconstructing it is that I realized in like the impact of it on my life was because I was raised in a very religious background in a Catholic all-boys school, and we went to these not so positive sex camps, as they called them, where we were fed a lot of sexual propaganda. And so when I started to trace the fact that a lot of my beliefs about sexuality were coming from a source other than myself, it became easy for me to deconstruct. And I think a lot of people would do well in, I don't know, even if it's just asking in a capacity where they feel comfortable, they'll start to move forward.
Well, Lethabo, stay on the line. We're going to take a short break. We want to continue speaking about this, but also the impacts of purity culture on all of society, and not particularly those who have been victimized because of it. Because usually in a patriarchal society, it seems like men have the advantage from, being perpetrators of such cultures.
Yes.
But in fact, they become victims too to the same cultures that they continue to perpetrate. So let's go into that after the break. I see you everyone there on our live stream on Facebook. Rafik Wamatola, Alfred Innocent saying they're coming from Durban, KwaZulu-Natal. Shafi Magesi saying we're live from Machinga, Malawi. And Twaha Ibra saying that they're also from Durban, KwaZulu-Natal, listening to this conversation. Thank you all for joining us. Comment and let us know what you think about this conversation.
Ukatili wa kijinsia unaharibu maisha na kutenga jamii. Hutokea nyumbani, shuleni, kazini na mara nyingi kwa ukimya. Lakini hauwezi kuendelea. Ukiona, ongea. Ikiwa unaumia, funguka, kwa sababu kutofanya lolote sio chaguo. Sikiliza vituo vyote 19 vya redio kuanzia Jumatano ya tarehe 23 Julai kwenye mijadala, ushauri, tamthilia, maonyesho ya elimu na mahojiano na wataalamu, manusura, watunga sheria na nchi nzima iliyoathirika na ukatili wa kijinsia kwenye vituo vyako pendwa vya redio. Piga simu 0800 428 428 ili kuripoti nyanyasaji au kupata msaada. GBV ikomeshwe na wewe. Ujumbe huu umeletwa kwenu na shirika la SABC.
Call us on +27 63 406 9126 and contribute to the conversation.
Purity culture is the conversation we're having, joined on the line by social commentator and podcaster Lethabo Maluke. Speaking about the impacts of purity culture, we've unpacked a little bit what it actually looks like in society. You might hear the terms like, I've never heard of that before, but I can guarantee that you've seen it happening in the conversations you might have had in the societies and the communities that we find ourselves in, perhaps even on social media. Such a progressive place, isn't it? But these notions continue staying with us through and through generations. Let's speak about the impacts of purity culture. You mentioned quite a few of them, but in passing, and I want you to sort of go deeper into that, because you spoke about how it might impact our healthcare system in terms of people not being able to get testing for HIV and AIDS, young people being afraid to speak about their sexual health and their sexuality. Let's go deeper into some of those impacts in broader society.
Yeah. So a few weeks ago, I had a doctor on my podcast, and one of the biggest things we were discussing is medical misogyny towards Black women who are making inquiries about their sexual health. And she often speaks about how there's so many diseases, illnesses related to women's reproductive systems. But when it's Black women, there's this bias that says, well, if she's coming to test here, maybe she's sleeping around too much. If she's asking questions, she's strong enough. If there's pain, abdominal pain, you know what? Black women are stronger. So we see this medical misogyny in practice towards Black women trying to seek help from the healthcare system. But also, it's disempowering men and women at the same time, because something I spoke about, I think even on my podcast as well, again, I'm quoting it again, is that a lot of men don't actually know the things that could go wrong with their own reproductive organs, because they think the only thing that they need to do to have a healthy sexual health is to just abstain or to have sex once while they're married. I mean, there's so many men who are so scared to go to a men's clinic, right? Because they're afraid of the stigmatization. There's so many men who are afraid to get tested for a cancer because they think, oh my God, if I'm exposed and naked, what does this mean? I mean, for example, there's this very common condition when men's testicles can move out of place and go into your bladder. But a lot of men don't know that, because purity culture even affects us in the smallest of ways, where you think as long as it's not related to an STD or an STI or HIV explicitly, it's safe. But then it's also impacting the need for comprehensive sexual education. A lot of political parties last year who had the element of religion as to why we had to vote for them were selling us these ideas that, you know what, vote for us because we will kill comprehensive sexual education because it's teaching kids about masturbation. When in actual fact, kids get to be empowered to know when predators are around them and such. But if you view this thing as like we're teaching kids about masturbation, you make them more vulnerable to predators. So it's disempowering us in so many different ways. Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm. And let's also talk about the culture of crime that I think is also stimulated by purity culture, right? Because, you know, the whole premise that I even started with as a little boy, this obsession of the virgin, is also kind of something that I think seeps into the psyche of our rape culture in this country, because of how we see women's bodies and how we also have objectified them. But also this whole purity obsession is something that I think is linked to our our bias?
Mm-hmm. Purity culture is rape culture in a lot of aspects because it has this emphasis on infantilizing women, right? Sometimes it even comes off as pedophilic. Because if there's this emphasis on women who have not been around, in inverted commas, who have no life experience, because sometimes it doesn't just stay with women who are not sleeping around. It also stays with women who are moving from relationship to relationship, even if they're abstaining from sexual acts. And when you start to view women like that, then your ideal partner becomes a 10-year-old girl. And it means that your ideal woman is a disempowered woman, a woman who cannot willingly make informed, I don't know, sexual decisions. And it definitely ties into our rape culture because when you put virginity on this prize, it also grooms men to see it as something that they need to take and something that they sometimes need to forcefully take. I'm not sure if you've been seeing this clip that's been going around from this documentary where these two men who have a history of rape speak about the things that motivate them. And one of them unashamedly says that he was drawn to raping one of his victims because he found out that she was a virgin and therefore she became more prized in his eyes. Mm-hmm. A lot of rape culture is built on this idea of wanting to humiliate and wanting a power play. And if virginity and the way we see it is something that we view as infantilizing, then a lot of people are encouraged to rape as a way to dominate. Because I think a lot of people view rape as well as this issue of someone not being able to control themselves or having poor sexual discipline. But if we've been grooming men through these channels for years and years and years, decades, centuries, that, hey, sex is something that you should take and you should be the one to take it first from a woman, why do we get surprised when a lot of them are called to be rapists?
And you know the thing about these kinds of societal expectations, particularly on women's bodies. You mentioned earlier a term called body count, as something that we hear quite a lot, especially in modern day, where a woman's worth is associated to how many men she slept with. And with this glorification of the virginity, because I think virginity is just a concept; it doesn't exist medically. Doctors have been saying that the hymen, can break when women are riding a horse or even just walking. And in fact, so many women who have had sex still have an intact hymen, which is that notion of virginity. So it is still a concept. But men are expected to say, well, you must have the least amount of men that you've slept with. So you must have been a virgin. However, men must have, by the time they get, it's a celebration. Men must have experience by the time that they get married. Who are they having this experience with? It's quite a big contradiction when we look at this purity culture, because the men who must have the experience are also the same men who must sleep with women who mustn't have sex.
Yeah, because if this purity culture is being sold off to men for them to be valuable, have we ever heard a man saying he needs to perform value to be worthy of being married? Have we ever heard of a man saying, I wish a woman will see me as sexually moral or just morally superior and sees me as valuable enough to marry? We don't hear that. Have we ever seen a man saying, well, he feels dirty, impure, or even damaged for having multiple sexual partners? We don't see that because we encourage conquest in men. We encourage men to be, I don't know, adventurous. But more importantly, we encourage men to have autonomy because the issue becomes about whether or not who gets to have full control of their bodies. And unfortunately, we only encourage men to do that.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. Unfortunately, we run out of time, but I felt like this conversation could actually have gone on for some time.
But Lethabo,
tell us about your social media platforms, your podcast. Where can we find you?
Okay, on TikTok, I'm Lethabo Maluke 24. Same thing on Instagram. And my podcast is called Young, Popular, and Opinionated. We are halfway through the season. We've discussed children's cancer, super gonorrhea, medical misogyny, and topics very similar to this. So if it's something that you're interested in, please do check it out.
Great topics.
Thank you so much. That's Lethabo Maluke, social commentator, social media influencer, and podcaster, speaking with us about purity culture. Let us know what you think about that one. We are at Channel Africa 1, and our WhatsApp line is +2763 406 9126. Fikile Lengwati is back with our latest sports.
Sports.